The cold seeped through every layer of Alexis Brennan's ghillie suit, where she lay prone on the western ridge overlooking Corango Valley. 6 hours in this position, 6 hours with her cheek pressed against the stock of her MK-13 sniper rifle, watching the gray light of dawn creep across the mountains of eastern Afghanistan like a cautious intruder. Through her thermal scope, 12 heat signatures moved through the valley below. 12 rangers picking their way toward extraction, trusting that somewhere on the ridges above them, guardian angels watched over their movement with long rifles and patient eyes. Lex's job was to keep them alive. Senior Chief Warren Briggs had made it abundantly clear that her job was also to stay out of the way. His voice crackled through her earpiece with that familiar edge of dismissal that had become the soundtrack of her career over the past 3 months. Overwatch 2, you have Sector 7, East Ridge low priority. Keep your eyes open and your mouth shut. Copy, Senior Chief. Sector 7. The other snipers had drawn the primary routes, the choke points, the likely ambush corridors, where Taliban fighters would position if they intended violence. Lex had been assigned the quiet sector, the goat paths, the nothing. Fourth mission in a row where Briggs had positioned her where she could do the least good, see the least action, prove the least about what she could actually do. She adjusted her scope and began her systematic scan of the terrain. The mountains here held secrets in every shadow, and she had learned long ago that quiet sectors had a way of becoming loud without warning. That was the thing about underestimation. People who dismissed you never saw you coming, but they also never saw what was coming for them. Lex had been 4 years old when the Navy chaplain appeared at their door in Norfolk, Virginia. She remembered her mother's face going pale, remembered the way the chaplain's words seemed to come from very far away, remembered not understanding why Mommy was crying. Colonel Nathan Brennan, killed in action. February 24th, 1991. Operation Desert Storm. The details came later when she was old enough to read the after-action reports, old enough to understand what words like ambush and hostile fire, and stayed behind to cover the withdrawal, actually meant in the language of men who died far from home. Her father had been a sniper. One of the best the Army had ever produced, though the official records were characteristically modest in their praise. He had volunteered for Overwatch on a deep patrol in southern Iraq, providing security for a platoon led by a young lieutenant named Warren Briggs. Nathan Brennan had spotted the ambush before it happened, had reported enemy movement, coordinated positioning, the geometric patterns that separated random Iraqi fighters from professionals executing a plan. They had been wrong. 11 men died in the first 90 seconds. The 12th man, Lieutenant Briggs, survived because Colonel Nathan Brennan left his protected position on the ridge and came down into the kill zone with his rifle, buying Briggs 30 more seconds to run. 30 seconds purchased with a life. Lex's mother never remarried. She raised her daughter alone, working as a nurse at Portsmouth Naval Hospital, keeping Nathan's Medal of Honor on the mantle like a shrine to a man who had chosen strangers over coming home. Some children might have resented that choice. Lex had worshipped it. She joined the Navy at 22, the earliest she could apply for the Special Warfare Pipeline. Bud's training had tried to break her, like it tried to break everyone, but she carried her father's legacy in her bones and his rifle skills in her genes. Top of her sniper school class, 14 confirmed kills across 2 deployments before she turned 27. When her orders came through assigning her to a SEAL team at Forward Operating Base Chapman, she had thought she was finally getting the chance to prove herself at the highest level. That was before she met Senior Chief Warren Briggs. 3 months ago, October 20th, 2014. Lex had walked into the team room with her orders and her gear ready to contribute, ready to excel. Briggs had looked at her name on the roster and gone white. She remembered that moment with perfect clarity. The way his hand had frozen on the paper. The way something moved behind his eyes that looked like recognition and grief and fear all tangled together. "Brennan," he had said quietly. "Alexis Brennan." "Yes, Senior Chief?" "Your father was Nathan Brennan, Colonel, Army sniper." It was not a question. "Yes, Senior Chief. Did you know him?" Briggs had not answered. He had simply assigned her to equipment inventory and walked away. She learned later through the careful gossip of men who knew how to keep secrets that Briggs had gone immediately to Chief Petty Officer Graham Walsh with instructions that were both clear and inflexible. "Nathan Brennan's daughter," Briggs had told Walsh, "the man who saved my life in Desert Storm. I owe him everything. Keep her in quiet sectors, Low-risk positions. I won't let her die like he did. Lex did not know about that conversation. She only knew that mission after mission she drew the assignments that kept her away from the action. Rear security, eastern perimeter, southern approach, Sector 7. While other snipers accumulated confirmed kills and commendations, Lex accumulated reports that praised her discipline and professionalism while carefully noting that she had engaged 0 targets. She had begun to doubt herself, begun to wonder if perhaps her father's talent had not passed to her after all, if the genetics of marksmanship were a myth, and she was simply a competent shooter being revealed as ordinary when measured against true excellence. The doubt aided her during the long hours of darkness between missions. What she did not know was that she was the fourth. Rebecca Hayes had been a hospital corpsman, second class, highly trained in tactical medicine with recommendations from 3 combat deployments. She had served under Briggs for 8 months before requesting transfer to a medical facility in San Diego. Hayes had left because Briggs consistently overruled her medical assessments, deferring instead to operators with no medical training. When she protested that her triage decisions were being ignored, Briggs had told her she was being emotional and needed to trust the experience of the men who had been doing this longer. After the 4th time he countermanded her medical judgment, Hayes had quietly submitted transfer paperwork and disappeared from the special operations world she had worked so hard to enter. Catherine Stone had been an intelligence specialist, first class with a gift for pattern recognition that had contributed to 3 successful operations against high-value targets. Briggs had never allowed her to present her own intelligence briefings. Every analysis she produced was delivered to commanders by a male officer, while Stone remained behind the scenes. When she asked why Briggs had explained that field commanders would not trust intelligence coming from a woman, that he was protecting her from their bias by keeping her invisible. Stone had lasted a year before requesting transfer to Southcom, where her intelligence work was at least credited to her name, even if she never received the recognition she had earned. Samantha Cross had been an explosive ordnance disposal technician, brilliant, careful, with hands steady enough to disarm devices that would have terrified less skilled operators. Briggs had told her directly in front of the entire team during a mission brief that women lacked the psychological stability for high-intensity EOD work. When Cross objected, Briggs had placed her on administrative duty for 2 weeks, claiming she was proving his point by getting emotional. Cross had left the Navy entirely 18 months ago. She worked as an engineer for a private firm in Seattle, now her talent lost to the service because one man's prejudice had been more powerful than her proven competence. 3 women over 4 years, all of them excellent at their jobs. All of them driven out by a senior chief who treated their gender as a disqualifying characteristic. Lex knew none of this. She knew only that she was drowning in quiet sectors and beginning to believe she deserved them. The mission briefing had taken place the previous afternoon in a plywood-walled room that smelled of coffee and gun oil. Briggs had stood at the front with a map of Corango Valley projected behind him, his voice carrying the confident authority of a man who had survived 28 years in the teams. "Objective is straightforward," he had said. 12 Rangers conducting a clearing operation in the valley. We provide overwatch during their extraction. Intelligence indicates Taliban activity in the area, but threat assessment is minimal. The map showed the valley floor and the surrounding ridges divided into sectors. Sectors 1 and 2 covered the primary extraction routes. Sectors 3 and 4 watched the choke points where ambushes were most likely. Sectors 5 and 6 monitored secondary approaches. Sector 7 was the goat paths and rear approaches. Low probability. Nothing sector. Briggs had assigned the sectors with practiced efficiency. The veterans with the most confirmed kills got the primary positions. The newer operators got the choke points. Lex got Sector 7 again. "Brennan," Briggs had said, without looking at her, "you watch the back door, maintain radio discipline, report anything that moves." She had copied the assignment without comment, had gathered her gear, had prepared her rifle with the same meticulous care she brought to every mission. After the briefing, she had returned to her quarters to find something waiting on her bunk. A photograph, old and creased, slipped under her door by someone who wanted her to see it but did not want to be seen delivering it. The photo was black and white, the kind of image that spoke to film cameras in a world before digital. 2 men in desert camouflage standing beside a Humvee in terrain that could only be Iraq. The younger man on the left wore the rank of lieutenant and a smile that had not yet learned what war would teach him. The older man on the right held a rifle with the casual competence of someone who knew exactly what the weapon could do. Lex recognized her father immediately. She had seen enough photographs to know his face, the way he stood, the quiet confidence in his eyes. The lieutenant was younger, leaner, not yet weathered by decades of combat. But she recognized him too. Warren Briggs. Written on the back in faded ink, "Your father saved my life. WB." Lex had stared at that photograph for 20 minutes, turning it over in her hands, trying to understand. If Briggs owed her father everything, if Nathan Brennan had literally given his life so Briggs could survive, why had the senior chief spent 3 months treating her like a liability? She had no answer. She had carried the photograph with her to the ridge, tucked into the pocket of her combat shirt, like a talisman against doubt. Now 6 hours into her watch, 0431, hours on a January morning that felt like every other morning in Afghanistan, Lex spotted movement on the East Ridge. 3 figures emerged from behind a rock formation, 1,100 meters out, moving with purpose that had nothing to do with herding goats. She tracked them through her thermal scope, watching their heat signatures bloom bright against the cool mountain stone. Military-age males, moving tactically, taking positions. She keyed her mic. Overwatch 2 to Overwatch 1. 3 MEMS establishing position, East Ridge grid, Echo 7-9er. Briggs responded within seconds, his voice carrying that familiar dismissal. Overwatch 2, probably locals. Goat herders use those paths. Continue observation. Lex kept her scope on the 3 men. Watch them reach their destination. Watch them begin unpacking equipment from bags they had carried up the mountain. The shape that emerged was unmistakable even at this distance. Long barrel, bipod, ammunition belt, PKM machine gun. Overwatch 2, she transmitted, keeping her voice level and professional. Contacts are establishing a PKM emplacement. They have clear firing lanes on the Ranger element. Static, then Briggs again, irritation bleeding through the radio discipline. Brennan, I said they're locals. Do not clog comms with phantom contacts. Focus on your sector. She bit down on a response that wanted to come. 3 years in special operations. Top of her sniper school class. 14 confirmed kills. But Briggs had decided before she ever arrived that she did not belong, and nothing she did would change his mind. She watched the PKM team settle into position. Watched them sight down into the valley where 12 Americans walked toward a place they would never walk out of if someone did not stop what was about to happen. More movement in her scope. Another position 200 meters south of the first. 2 more fighters with an RPG launcher. Then another cluster further east. Then more on the North Ridge. Lex counted 14 fighters. 18, 23. She stopped counting at 30 because the number no longer mattered. What mattered was the geometry. 3 sides of a box, PKM positions for suppressive fire, RPG teams for vehicles and cover, riflemen to finish whatever the heavy weapons started, a textbook ambush, and the Rangers were walking directly into the kill zone. The geometry was exactly the same. Exactly. 3-sided box valley floor offering no cover, high ground advantage to the attackers. Lex had studied the after-action report from her father's death so many times she could recite it from memory. This was how Nathan Brennan had died. This was how 12 men had walked into hell while their Overwatch dismissed the warnings as phantom contacts. History was repeating itself 1,100 meters below her position, and the only person who could see it was a woman whose commander had decided she was not worth listening to. Lex keyed her mic one more time, knowing what the response would be but unable to remain silent while men walked toward slaughter. Overwatch 1, this is Overwatch 2. I have coordinated enemy positions establishing on 3 sides of the Ranger element. Count now exceeds 30 fighters. Recommend immediate warning to ground element and authorization to engage. The response came fast and cold. Overwatch 2, you are relieved of communications. 1 more transmission and you will be brought in for psychiatric evaluation. There are no enemy positions. They are goat herders. Do you copy? Through her scope, Lex watched the first PKM team chamber A round. The sound would not carry this far, but she could see the motion, the preparation, the coiling of violence about to spring. Minutes now, maybe less. Below her, 12 Rangers continued their patrol formation, completely unaware that 30 fighters were drawing beads on them from 3 directions, completely trusting that their Overwatch would warn them of danger. Lex had a choice to make: follow orders and watch Americans die, or disobey and face whatever consequences came. Briggs would end her career. The Navy might prosecute her. Everything she had worked for could disappear in the space of a single trigger pull. But 12 men would go home to their families, or they would die here while she followed orders. She thought about her father, thought about the choice he had made in a desert in Iraq when a lieutenant named Briggs needed 30 more seconds to run. Nathan Brennan could have stayed on his ridge, could have followed orders, could have preserved his own life. He had chosen differently. She could hear his voice in her memory, something he had said in a letter to her mother that Lex had found years after his death. When you see the shot, you take it. Doesn't matter what anyone says. Politics don't matter when lives are on the line. You trust your eyes, you trust your training, and you take the shot. Lex keyed her mic one final time. Senior Chief requesting permission to engage. I have immediate shots on multiple. Briggs cut her off, his voice sharp with anger. Negative, Overwatch 2. Air support inbound ETA 40 minutes. You will hold position or you will face court-martial. Is that clear? Senior Chief, in 40 minutes, they'll all be dead. That is not your call to make, petty officer. Now shut up and watch your sector. Silence filled her ear. Lex looked down at the photograph in her pocket. Young Lieutenant Briggs and Colonel Nathan Brennan standing together in a war that had ended before she learned to read. Her father had saved that lieutenant's life, had died so Briggs could live. And now Briggs was going to let 12 more men die because he could not trust the daughter of the man who had saved him. She whispered to the photograph, to the memory, to the ghost of a father she barely remembered. I won't let it happen again, Dad. Not like this. Lex reached down and switched her radio to off. The silence that followed was absolute. No more voices in her ear, no more orders, no more chain of command. Just Alexis Brennan and her rifle and 30 enemy fighters who did not know she existed. She settled her cheek against the stock of her MK-13. The familiar weight and balance centered her, brought clarity to a situation that was about to become irreversible. Once she fired, there would be no walking this back. Her career in naval special warfare would be over before the first brass casing hit the ground. But the Rangers would have a chance. Through her scope, she acquired the PKM gunner at 982 meters. He was settling behind his weapon, hands moving with practiced efficiency, preparing to pour belt-fed death into the valley below. Lex began her final breathing cycle. Inhale slowly, exhale completely. Find the natural respiratory pause where the body is still and the shot is true. Wind speed 8 miles per hour, quartering from the east. Adjust right 0.2 mils. Elevation target is 40 meters above her position. Adjust down 0.15 mils. Range 982 meters. Ballistic drop compensated automatically by her scope, but she ran the numbers anyway, double-checking what the technology told her because her father had taught her to never trust a machine more than her own calculations. The crosshairs settled on the gunner's center mass. His heat signature bloomed bright in her thermal scope. She could see his breathing, see the rhythm of his chest rising and falling. He had no idea he was about to die. Somewhere in the valley below, 12 Rangers walked closer to the ambush, trusting that someone was watching over them, trusting that the system would protect them. Somewhere in a tactical operations center, Senior Chief Warren Briggs was coordinating a response to a threat he refused to believe existed, confident in his experience and his authority. And here on a western ridge that everyone had dismissed as unimportant, a 28-year-old woman whose father had died in an ambush exactly like this one was about to make a choice that would echo across every life it touched. In 4 minutes, she would fire 19 bullets. 14 men would die. 10 men would live. And Alexis Brennan would become a ghost story that no one could quite explain and command would never quite acknowledge. But all of that was still 4 minutes in the future. Right now, in this moment, she was just a sniper with a clear shot and a direct order to hold fire. Her finger moved from the trigger guard to the trigger itself. 2 pounds of pressure. That was all it would take. 2 pounds of pressure, and a man would die, and history would diverge from the path it was currently following. Lex found her respiratory pause. The world narrowed to the crosshairs and the target in the mathematics of sending death across nearly 1,000 meters of Afghan morning. She whispered one last time so quietly that even if her radio had been on, No one would have heard her. "I'm sorry, Dad. I won't let them die the way you did." And she began to squeeze. The rifle kicked against Lex's shoulder with familiar authority. Through her scope, she watched the PKM gunner slump forward over his weapon, the distinctive stillness of death replacing the animate purpose that had occupied his body 1.3 seconds earlier. She worked the bolt. Smooth. Automatic. The brass casing ejected in a lazy arc that caught the first light of dawn. The assistant gunner was still processing what had happened, his head turning toward his dead companion with the slow confusion of a man whose brain had not yet accepted the impossible. Lex's second round caught him in the chest before understanding could arrive. He dropped beside the PKM, and the emplacement that had been preparing to shred the Rangers below went silent. 2 down. Lex shifted her scope to the North Ridge. Range 1,047 meters. The RPG team was loading a rocket, 2 men working in practice coordination. The loader knelt with the projectile preparing to slide it into the launcher. The gunner steadied the tube on his shoulder, sighting down into the valley where unsuspecting Americans walked closer to the killing ground. Lex led the loader slightly, accounting for his movement in the increased distance. Her third round took him through the spine. He collapsed like a puppet with cut strings, the rocket falling from nerveless fingers. The gunner's head snapped around, searching for the threat he could not see. He made the fatal decision to run rather than fight. Lex's fourth round caught him mid-stride, his momentum carrying him 3 more steps before his body understood it was already dead. He tumbled down the rocky slope, coming to rest in a position that no living spine could achieve. 4 kills in less than 30 seconds. Lex entered a state that every sniper knows, that place beyond conscious thought, where training and instinct merge into something that operates faster than rational mind. The world narrowed to mathematics and physics in the simple mechanical action of sending death downrange with surgical precision. Range, wind, elevation, acquire, breathe, squeeze, work the bolt, repeat. The enemy fighters still could not see her. Her position on the western ridge was outside their planned ambush, geometry a flank they had not accounted for because whoever had positioned them had not known she existed. The ghillie suit broke up her outline against the rocks. The suppressor on her rifle dispersed the muzzle signature, and the geometry meant they were looking the wrong direction, focused on the valley floor where their targets walked, not the ridge behind them where death had taken up residence. One by one they died without knowing where the bullets came from. Lex shifted to the second PKM position on the east ridge, 912 meters. The gunner was traversing his weapon, searching for targets, preparing to open fire. She put a round through his chest and watched the machine gun swing wild as dead hands released the trigger. The next fighter in line tried to take over the position. Lex's 6th shot dropped him before he could settle behind the weapon. A Taliban commander stood on the North Ridge using hand signals to coordinate the teams trying to salvage an ambush that was falling apart around him. Range 1,180 meters, the longest shot of her career to this point. Lex held her breath, made minute adjustments for the distance and the wind that was beginning to pick up as the sun rose higher. The bullet took 2.1 seconds to reach him. Lex watched through her scope as the round struck, watched the commander drop, watched the coordinated effort of 30 fighters dissolve into chaos as the man directing their movement ceased to exist. A spotter made the mistake of standing up, raising binoculars to search for whoever was destroying his unit. Rookie error. You never silhouette yourself on a ridgeline when someone with a rifle is hunting you. Lex's 8th round punched through his center mass and he went down hard. A fighter tried to flank south, repositioning for a better angle on the Rangers. He moved uphill at a run weapon held ready tactically, sound except for the fact that Lex had already calculated his trajectory. Range 1,134 meters. Moving target uphill. She led him by 3 feet, accounting for his speed and angle. The bullet caught him mid-stride. His momentum carried him 2 more steps before physics and biology reached agreement that he was no longer capable of movement. He tumbled down the rocky slope, his weapon clattering away into the stones. Another fighter on the south ridge knelt with an RPG, trying to get a rocket loaded and aimed before whatever invisible force was killing his brothers found him too. Lex's 10th round caught him as he lifted the launcher to his shoulder. The rocket fell unfired. A small mercy. An RPG detonating among its handlers would have created casualties that Lex preferred not to imagine. 4 minutes had passed since her first shot. 19 rounds fired. 14 confirmed kills. 5 shots placed for suppressive effect, forcing fighters to keep their heads down rather than achieving lethal hits. The valley below had transformed from a coordinated ambush into a panicked scramble for survival. The enemy fighters who remained alive pressed themselves flat against rocks, suddenly more afraid of drawing attention than of losing their quarry. The mathematics of the situation had reversed. They had been hunters setting a trap. Now they were prey, being systematically culled by something they could neither see nor fight. Some broke and ran. Lex dropped 2 more as they fled, not out of cruelty, but because running men were still men with weapons who might regroup and try again. Better to end it here on this ridge than to let them escape and plan another ambush for another patrol. The remaining fighters went to ground and stayed there, choosing survival over glory. Lex kept her scope moving, searching for additional threats, but the fight had gone out of them. The ambush was broken. In the valley below, 12 Rangers who had been walking toward death were still breathing. Staff Sergeant Derek Kane had led men through 5 deployments in countries that wanted him dead. He knew the sound of combat intimately, knew the difference between random contact and coordinated ambush, knew in his gut when things were about to go catastrophically wrong. The valley had felt wrong from the moment they entered it. Too quiet, too empty. The goats that usually dotted these hillsides were nowhere to be seen. The locals who normally watched American patrols from their doorways had vanished. Every instinct Kane had developed across 5 tours was screaming at him to get his men out of this terrain. He was about to key his mic and request permission to alter their route when the world turned to fire. The PKM opened up from the East Ridge first. That distinctive heavy chatter that every infantry soldier learned to fear, the sound of 7.62 millimeter rounds being delivered at 650 rounds per minute. Kane watched Private First Class Ethan Donovan spin and drop red mist hanging in the morning air where his shoulder used to be intact. Then the North Ridge erupted, then the South. Kane understood with terrible clarity that they had walked into a kill zone. A perfect 3-sided ambush, professionally executed, the kind of tactical setup that appeared in textbooks as examples of how to destroy a numerically superior force through positioning and geometry. "Cover!" he screamed, though his voice was barely audible over the volume of fire pouring down from the ridges. "Find cover now." But there was no cover. They stood in a natural bowl, a depression in the valley floor that offered nothing but loose rocks and scrub brush. The terrain that had seemed like easy walking had been chosen specifically because it offered no protection. They were fish in a barrel, and the bullets came from everywhere. Specialist Reeves went down clutching his leg. Sergeant Webb took shrapnel from a rock that exploded 2 feet from his face. Kane dragged both men toward a shallow depression that might stop pistol rounds but would do nothing against the heavy machine guns systematically working across their position. He keyed his radio with blood-slicked fingers. "Overwatch, Overwatch, this is Viper 6. We're taking heavy fire from multiple positions. Request immediate support. We are pinned down and taking casualties." The voice that came back was maddeningly calm. "Viper 6, Overwatch 1. We are assessing the situation. Hold your position." "Hold position?" Kane almost laughed. They were dying and command wanted them to hold position. "We cannot hold," he shouted into the radio. "I have men down. I have enemy on 3 sides. I need fire support now." An RPG streaked down from the North Ridge and detonated 15 meters to his left. The blast wave knocked Corporal Liam Martinez flat. When the dust cleared, Martinez was not moving. Something was wrong with the angle of his neck. Something was wrong with the stillness of his chest. Kane counted muzzle flashes through the chaos. East Ridge, North Ridge, South Ridge, at least 25 shooters. Probably more. Professional spacing. Coordinated fire. This was not some random Taliban ambush thrown together by farmers with rifles. This was a planned operation executed by people who knew exactly what they were doing. He did the math that every infantry leader learned to do in moments like this. 12 men, standard combat load, current rate of fire, 6 minutes of ammunition, maybe 7 if they were disciplined about shot placement, then empty magazines and fixed bayonets against 30 enemies on the high ground. The outcome was not in question, only the timeline. "Return fire," he ordered, because there was nothing else to order and because Rangers did not die quietly. "Make them pay for every inch." His men fought. God, they fought. Webb was bleeding from his face, but still putting rounds downrange with controlled bursts that spoke to training, holding firm under fire. Specialist Samantha covered their eastern flank with discipline that would have made any instructor proud. Even the wounded crawled to positions where they could contribute because that was what Rangers did when the world fell apart. But it was not enough. It could never be enough. The geometry was impossible, the numbers overwhelming, and Kane felt death closing around his patrol like a fist. Another Ranger fell. Private Shun took a round through his hip that dropped him screaming. Kane crawled toward him with tourniquet already in hand when the PKM on the East Ridge shifted its fire directly onto his position. Dirt erupted in a line walking toward him. Kane pressed flat against the ground and made peace with whatever came next. He thought about his daughter back in Georgia, thought about how she would grow up without a father, thought about his wife getting a knock on the door and a folded flag and a letter explaining that her husband had died doing his duty. The PKM rounds walked closer, inevitable as a heartbeat, 3 feet away, 2 feet, 1. Then the machine gun went silent. Kane lifted his head, expecting to see the gunner reloading, expecting the brief pause before the killing resumed. Instead, he saw a figure slumped over the weapon, motionless against the morning sky. A rifle crack echoed across the valley. Distant, sharp, completely different from the cacophony of automatic fire. On the North Ridge, the RPG team came apart. One man dropping instantly, the other scrambling for cover he would never reach. Another crack and he fell too. Kane's mind raced through possibilities. Air support was 40 minutes out. The SEAL Overwatch positions were on the wrong angles to hit these targets. Someone else was shooting, someone he could not see, and every shot they fired was saving American lives. "Who the hell is that?" Sergeant Cole Mitchell shouted from his position 10 meters away, blood streaming down his face from a shrapnel wound that had laid his cheek open to the bone. Kane shook his head. He scanned the ridge lines, desperately searching for muzzle flash, for scope glint, for any indication of where their guardian angel had positioned. The western ridge showed nothing but rock and scrub. No movement, no signature, no sign that anything human existed there at all. But the shots kept coming. Crack, 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 each one deliberate, each one lethal, each one finding a target with precision that spoke to skill beyond anything Kane had witnessed in 5 deployments. The enemy position that had been shredding his patrol fell silent one by one as an invisible rifle reached out and touched them with terrible accuracy. The Taliban fighters began to panic. Their coordinated ambush dissolved into chaos as men who had expected easy slaughter found themselves being hunted instead. One tried to reposition and dropped mid-stride. Another broke from cover to run and made it 3 steps before the distant rifle found him. A third raised his head to search for the threat and lost the top of his skull to a round that arrived faster than sound. Kane seized the moment that courage or desperation or training demanded. "Rangers!" he bellowed, finding his command voice even with his ears ringing and his hands shaking. "Shift fire to North Ridge. Keep their heads down." His men responded with the discipline that made Rangers what they were. Even wounded, even terrified, they put rounds down range and added to the pressure that the invisible sniper had created. The enemy fighters who had not already died pressed flat against rocks and stopped shooting, suddenly more afraid of drawing attention than of losing their quarry. The volume of incoming fire dropped from overwhelming to sporadic, then from sporadic to occasional, then to nothing. The valley grew quiet except for the moans of wounded men and the ringing in ears abused by sustained gunfire. Kane risked raising his head above the shallow depression and surveyed the battlefield with the careful paranoia of a man who had survived 5 tours by never trusting silence. Bodies littered the ridgelines. Enemy fighters who had expected to massacre Americans now lay sprawled across the rocks they had used for cover. He counted at least a dozen visible from his position and knew there were more on angles he could not see. "Sergeant Samantha," Kane called out, "get the wounded consolidated. Webb, cover the east. I want accountability on all personnel." He crawled toward Private Shun. The young ranger had his hands pressed against the wound in his hip, blood seeping between his fingers despite his best efforts to maintain pressure. Kane pulled the tourniquet tight and watched some color return to the kid's face. "You're going to be fine," Kane told him, lying with the confident authority that leaders used when the truth would not help. "Just keep pressure on it. Medevac is inbound." The valley had transformed from kill zone to aftermath. Two Rangers lay dead. Corporal Martinez and Private Donovan, their bodies already being prepared for transport with the gentle respect that soldiers showed their fallen. Four more were wounded seriously enough to need immediate evacuation. The rest were combat effective by the generous definition that meant they could still hold a rifle even if they were running on adrenaline and shock. They should all be dead. Kane knew this with the certainty of a man who understood tactical geometry. The ambush had been perfect. The kill zone inescapable. 30 fighters on three sides with heavy weapons in high ground against 12 men on foot in open terrain. 12 body bags should be heading home to 12 families. Instead, 10 men still breathed because someone on a distant ridge had decided to fight for them. Kane's radio crackled. Viper 6, this is Overwatch 1. Extraction inbound, ETA 15 minutes. Secure your casualties for movement. Kane keyed his mic, keeping his voice level despite the anger rising in his chest. Overwatch 1, Viper 6, who was providing fire support from the Western Ridge. That sniper just saved my entire patrol. Silence stretched for a long moment. Then Senior Chief Briggs responded, his voice flat and controlled in a way that set off every alarm Kane had for detecting evasion. Viper 6 situation is under control. Focus on your casualties. Extraction is priority. Kane recognized a non-answer when he heard one. Someone had saved his men, and the SEAL team leader did not want to talk about who. Mitchell limped over a field dressing pressed against his cheek where shrapnel had carved a valley through flesh. Staff Sergeant, he said quietly, I counted 14 shots from that western position, maybe more. Every single one of them hit something. That's not luck. No, Kane agreed, that's not luck. They stood in silence for a moment, two men who had just survived the unsurvivable, trying to process the gap between the death they had expected and the life they still possessed. Whoever that was, Mitchell continued, his voice carrying the weight of a debt that could never be fully repaid. They're either the best sniper I've ever seen, or they sold their soul for those shots. And I don't believe in selling souls. Neither did Kane. 14 shots, 14 kills, at ranges that had to exceed 1,000 meters, shooting from an angle the enemy never anticipated. Timing and precision that spoke to extraordinary skill and courage that came from somewhere deeper than training. That was not luck. That was not chance. That was mastery married to will, married to the decision to save strangers at the cost of everything. The helicopters appeared on the horizon, rotors beating the morning air, bringing salvation that had arrived too late to matter, except that someone else had bought them the time they needed. Kane watched the birds approach and thought about the questions he would ask when they reached base. Someone had saved his patrol. Someone command did not want to acknowledge. Someone whose shots had echoed across the valley like the voice of an angel no one could see, but everyone had heard. He intended to find out who. On the western ridge, Alexis Brennan sat alone with her rifle across her lap and the dawn spreading gold across mountains that had just tried to kill 12 Americans. The valley below showed signs of life now. Rangers moving, casualties being tended. The organized chaos of men who had survived and were methodically ensuring that a survival continued. 2 black bags. She had watched through her scope as the Rangers prepared their fallen for transport. Corporal Martinez and Private Donovan, dead before she fired her first shot. Nothing anyone could have done. But the other 10 were alive. Wounded, traumatized, but breathing. Going home to families who would never know how close they came to loss. Lex's radio sat silent beside her where she had placed it after turning it off 8 minutes ago. 8 minutes that had changed everything. 8 minutes that had ended her career and saved 10 lives, and she would make the same choice again without hesitation. She heard footsteps on the rocks behind her. Not trying for stealth. Someone who wanted her to know they were coming. Chief Petty Officer Graham Walsh appeared from between the boulders, his face unreadable in the growing light. He had climbed the western ridge alone, leaving his position to find her, which meant he knew what she had done and had chosen to come anyway. Briggs is going to crucify you for this, Walsh said without preamble. Lex continued field stripping her rifle, her hands performing the familiar ritual that brought order to chaos. I know. He's in the TOC right now, trying to figure out how to write the after-action report, how to credit the saves without mentioning your name, how to bury this. Did they make it? Lex asked. The Rangers. 10 alive. 2 KIA, because of you. She nodded and kept working on her rifle. The bolt carrier needed cleaning, carbon residue from 19 rounds in rapid succession. Walsh stood silent for a long moment. Then he pulled something from his pocket. A small digital recorder, the kind that operators used for after-action debriefs. "I recorded everything," he said quietly. "Every contact report you made. Every time Briggs dismissed you. Every warning you gave. Time-stamped, backed up to 3 different secure locations." Lex looked up at him surprised. "Why, Paham?" Walsh's jaw tightened. "Because I watched him do this to 3 other women before you. Rebecca Hayes, Catherine Stone, Samantha Cross, all of them excellent operators. All of them driven out because Briggs couldn't see past their gender." He held up the recorder. "I stayed quiet then because it was easier. Because I told myself it wasn't my place to challenge a senior chief. Because I was a coward." His voice hardened. "I watched those women leave and I did nothing. I watched Briggs assign you to quiet sectors for 3 months and I did nothing. This morning I listened to you report an ambush 3 times and get dismissed 3 times, and I almost did nothing again." He looked down at the valley where Rangers were loading wounded into helicopters. "I can't do nothing anymore. Not after this. Not after watching men almost die because I was too afraid to speak up." Lex studied his face, saw the guilt there, the shame, the determination of a man who had found his line and decided to stand on it regardless of cost. "He'll destroy you too," she said. "Maybe," Walsh agreed, "but I can live with that. I can't live with staying quiet anymore." He handed her the recorder. "This goes to JSOC, to investigators, to anyone who will listen. Briggs doesn't get to bury this." Before Lex could respond, her radio crackled to life. She had forgotten to remove the battery. Briggs's voice came through cold and controlled and vibrating with barely suppressed fury. "Brennan, return to base immediately. Bring your weapon and all mission equipment. You are confined to quarters pending investigation." Lex looked at Walsh. He nodded once. She keyed the mic. "Copy, returning to base." The helicopter ride back to Phoebe Chapman was silent. Lex sat with her rifle and her thoughts and the knowledge that her career in naval special warfare was ending before she turned 29. She had known the cost when she turned off her radio, had accepted it, would pay it without complaint because 10 men were breathing who would not be breathing if she had followed orders. The fob appeared below them, a collection of plywood and concrete and sandbags that represented American presence in a country that had been breaking empires for thousands of years. The helicopter settled onto the landing pad in a cloud of dust, and Lex stepped out into the morning heat. Walsh accompanied her to the team room without being asked. A witness, a statement that she was not alone even if regulations said she should be. The door to the team room slammed open before they reached it. Senior Chief Warren Briggs filled the doorway, his face dark with an anger that went beyond professional disappointment into something personal and wounded. He crossed the distance in 3 strides and stopped close enough that Lex could see the vein pulsing in his temple. "You're done, Brennan," his voice carried across the compound, drawing attention from every operator in range. "Done court-martial for insubordination, reckless endangerment, compromising operational security. I am going to throw every charge I can find at you, and you will never work in special operations again." Lex stood at attention and said nothing. "Are you hearing me?" Briggs's voice rose. "You disobeyed a direct order. You compromised our position. You could have gotten the entire team killed." She met his eyes. "I saved 10 American lives, Senior Chief." "You got lucky." Briggs stepped closer. "You fired without authorization, without support, without any regard for the chain of command. There was no other support." Lex cut him off, her voice level, but carrying an edge now. "I was the only Overwatch position engaging. The ambush I reported. The ambush you dismissed. The ambush that killed 2 Rangers and would have killed all 12 if someone hadn't stopped it." Something flickered behind Briggs's eyes. Uncertainty. Fear. "Your father would be ashamed of you," he said quietly, and it was the quiet that made the words cut deeper than shouting ever could. The words hung in the air between them. Then something in Lex broke. Not her composure, not her discipline, but the deference she had maintained for 3 months in the face of systematic dismissal. "My father died in an ambush exactly like this one." Her voice cracked like a whip. She took a step toward Briggs. because his Overwatch didn't listen, because someone decided they knew better than the man with eyes on target. She pulled the photograph from her pocket, the image of two men in a desert that had tried to kill them both. Three-sided kill zone. Colonel Nathan Brennan reported enemy positions forming. Command dismissed his warnings as phantom contacts. 12 men walked into that ambush. One walked out. She held the photo up between them. That one was you, wasn't it, Senior Chief Briggs? February 24th, 1991. Lieutenant Warren Briggs, sole survivor. My father stayed behind so you could run. Briggs went white. His hands began to shake. You sent me this photo. Lex continued, her voice dropping to something cold and precise. Your father saved my life. So tell me, Senior Chief, if you owe him everything, why have you spent 3 months trying to keep me from doing the job he died doing? Why did you dismiss every warning I gave you? Why did you almost let 12 Rangers die the same way he did? Briggs opened his mouth. No words came. His face worked through expressions that started with anger and moved through shock and ended somewhere near anguish. He turned and walked away without another word. Lex stood in the team room doorway with the photo still in her hand and Walsh beside her, and the weight of what she had just done settling onto her shoulders like snow accumulating on a branch that would eventually break. You're confined to quarters, Walsh said quietly. I'll make sure the recorder gets where it needs to go. Lex nodded. She surrendered her rifle to the armorer, turned in her communications equipment, walked to her quarters past operators, who watched with expressions that ranged from respect to uncertainty to carefully neutral professionalism. The door closed behind her, and she was alone with the choices she had made and the consequences that would follow. Through the window, she could see the medical pad where helicopters were landing, wounded Rangers being carried to the aid station, 2 black bags being handled with the reverence reserved for those who would make no more journeys except the final one home. 10 men alive, 2 men dead. Should have been 12 dead. Lex whispered to the empty room, to the ghost of a father she barely remembered, to the photograph of 2 men in a war that had ended before she understood what war meant. I got them, Dad. I got them. Outside, the sun climbed higher over the mountains of Afghanistan, indifferent to human drama, constant in its arc across skies that had seen 10,000 years of men killing men for reasons that seemed important at the time. In a tactical operations center, Senior Chief Warren Briggs stared at a mission report and tried to find words that would explain what had happened without revealing the truth that was eating him alive. In a medical facility, 10 Rangers received treatment for wounds that should have been fatal. And on a western ridge that everyone had dismissed as unimportant brass casings lay scattered among the rocks 19 small pieces of evidence that someone had been there, had seen what no one else would see, had done what no one else would do. The story was far from over. But for now, in this moment, Alexis Brennan sat alone in quarters and waited for judgment, while 12 families who would never know her name went about their lives unaware of how close they had come to loss and unable to thank the woman who had stood between their loved ones and death. That was the way of it sometimes. The best work happened in shadows. The greatest courage went unrecognized. And the people who saved the world did it quietly without expectation of reward because someone had to, and they were there when the moment came. The night came to forward operating Base Chapman, the way it always did, sudden and absolute, as if someone had thrown a switch that governed the sun. Lex sat in her quarters watching the darkness swallow the mountains and thought about how quickly a life could change direction. 24 hours ago, she had been a SEAL sniper with a promising career and a legacy to uphold. Now she was confined to quarters awaiting charges that would likely end everything she had worked for since she was old enough to understand what her father had died for. She did not regret it. The only thing she regretted was that 2 Rangers had died before she could stop the ambush. 2 families would receive folded flags and formal letters, and the cold comfort of knowing their loved ones had died serving their country. Martinez and Donovan. She had watched their bodies being prepared for transport and felt the weight of arriving 30 seconds too late to save them. But 10 others were alive. 10 families would not receive that knock on the door. 10 sets of children would grow up with fathers. 10 wives would not become widows. That had to be enough. That had to be. A knock at her door brought her out of the dark spiral her thoughts were following. She expected Walsh, maybe, or someone from command with formal notification of charges. Instead, she found herself facing a man she did not recognize. Tall, weathered in the way that career military became weathered wearing the rank insignia of a lieutenant commander and an expression that gave away nothing. "Petty Officer Brennan," the officer said. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Victoria Hayes. JSOC sent me to investigate the incident in Corango Valley. May I come in?" Lex stepped aside and let Hayes enter. The lieutenant commander moved through the small space with the efficient assessment of someone trained to gather information from environments. Her eyes cataloged everything: the stripped bunk, the precisely arranged gear, the photograph of Nathan Brennan in his dress uniform that Lex kept on the wall. Hayes settled into the only chair and opened a folder. "I've spent the last 6 hours reviewing communications logs, after-action reports, and conducting preliminary interviews. I'd like to hear your account of what happened." For the next 30 minutes, Lex provided a clinical reconstruction of the mission. She described her position on the Western Ridge, the sequential observation of enemy fighters, establishing positions, the 3 contact reports she had transmitted to Senior Chief Briggs, and the dismissals she had received in response. She recounted the moment she turned off her radio and made the decision to engage without authorization. She detailed each of the 19 rounds she had fired, providing exact ranges, target descriptions, and ballistic calculations. 14 confirmed kills, 5 suppressive shots, 4 minutes that had saved 10 lives and ended her career. Hayes took notes without interruption, her pen moving across paper with steady precision. When Lex finished, the lieutenant commander looked up with eyes that had seen enough of military bureaucracy to recognize when something was profoundly wrong. "You reported the ambush 3 times, Hayes said, at 0431, 0439, and 0446. Senior Chief Briggs dismissed all 3 reports. Is that correct?" "Yes, Commander." "And you requested permission to engage twice. Both requests were denied." "Yes, Commander." Hayes flipped through her notes. "Petty Officer Brennan, I've reviewed your service record, top of your sniper school class. 14 confirmed kills prior to this mission. Commendations from 3 different commanding officers. Every evaluation describes you as professional, skilled, and demonstrating exceptional judgment under pressure." She closed the folder and leaned forward. "So help me understand. If you're as good as your record suggests, why did Senior Chief Briggs assign you to Sector 7, the lowest priority position on 4 consecutive missions?" Lex hesitated. She could feel the conversation approaching territory that was dangerous in ways that had nothing to do with her disobedience and everything to do with systemic issues that the military preferred not to acknowledge. "You'd have to ask Senior Chief Briggs that question, Commander." Hayes smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I intend to, but I'm asking you first." "I don't know his reasoning, Commander. I only know that I consistently drew the quietest sectors while other snipers received primary positions." "Did you ever ask why?" "No, Commander." "Why not?" Lex met Hayes' eyes. "Because I'm a woman in naval special warfare. Asking why I'm being sidelined would be interpreted as complaint. Complaint gets you labeled as someone who can't handle the pressure. Someone who doesn't belong." Oh, Hayes nodded slowly, as if Lex had confirmed something she already suspected. "I've been making phone calls this afternoon. Did you know there were 3 female operators who served under Senior Chief Briggs before you?" "No, Commander." "Rebecca Hayes, hospital corpsman, left the team 8 months ago citing reconcilable differences in operational philosophy." "Catherine Stone, intelligence specialist, transferred after a year because she was never allowed to present her own analysis." "Samantha Cross, EOD technician, discharged from the Navy after Briggs told her publicly that women lack the psychological stability for high-intensity operations." Hayes let that information settle. "That's a pattern, Petty Officer Brennan. 4 highly qualified women in 4 years. All of them sidelined, dismissed, or driven out. And now we have a situation where the 4th woman reported an ambush that would have killed 12 Americans, was ignored 3 times, and had to disobey orders to prevent a massacre." "I'm not qualified to comment on Senior Chief Briggs's command decisions, Commander." "No," Hayes agreed, "but you're qualified to tell me why you turned off your radio and engaged without authorization." Lex took a breath. "Because following orders meant watching 12 men die the same way my father did. I couldn't let that happen again." Hayes opened her folder and pulled out a document Lex recognized. The after-action report from Desert Storm. February 1991. The ambush that had killed Colonel Nathan Brennan. "Your father was Senior Chief Briggs's overwatch when he died," Hayes said quietly. "Briggs was a lieutenant then, only survivor of the ambush because your father stayed behind to cover his escape. Yes, Commander. Did Briggs ever talk to you about that? No, Commander. I didn't know about the connection until I found a photograph he left for me. Hayes made a note. When did you find this photograph? The night before the mission. Someone slipped it under my door. And what did you think when you saw it? Lex looked at the photograph on her wall. Two men in a desert, one who died, one who lived. I thought that if Briggs owed my father everything, there had to be a reason he was treating me the way he was. I just didn't know what that reason was. And now I think he was trying to protect me, keep me safe in quiet sectors where nothing would happen, where I wouldn't end up like my father. Hayes closed her folder. Petty Officer Brennan, I want you to understand something. Senior Chief Briggs's trauma over your father's death doesn't excuse the fact that his decisions almost cost 12 Rangers their lives. Good intentions don't justify bad leadership, and protecting you by preventing you from doing your job isn't protection at all. She stood. I'm recommending that all charges against you be dismissed. Your actions saved American lives, but I need you to prepare yourself for what comes next. This investigation is going to get larger before it gets smaller. There are going to be uncomfortable questions about how the Navy handles female operators, about patterns of discrimination, about whether the culture in special operations prioritizes tradition over effectiveness. I didn't disobey orders to start an investigation, Commander. No, Hayes agreed. You disobeyed orders to save lives, but sometimes saving lives exposes the failures that put those lives at risk in the first place. Hayes moved toward the door, then paused. One more thing. The Rangers you saved are looking for you. Staff Sergeant Kane has been making calls through channels trying to find out who was on that western ridge. Word is spreading. You're not going to stay anonymous much longer. After Hayes left, Lex sat in the growing darkness and thought about consequences that rippled outward from single decisions like waves from a stone thrown into still water. Somewhere in the night, Warren Briggs sat alone in his quarters and stared at a photograph he had carried for 24 years. The image showed two men in a desert that had tried to kill them both. One had succeeded in killing, one had succeeded in surviving. And Briggs had spent every day since trying to deserve the 30 seconds Nathan Brennan had bought him with a life. He had failed. The knock on his door came at 2300 hours. Briggs knew who it would be before he opened it. Walsh stood in the corridor with an expression that mixed guilt and determination in equal measure. We need to talk, Walsh said. Briggs stepped aside and let him enter. Walsh moved to the center of the small room and turned to face him with the posture of a man who had made a decision and intended to see it through regardless of cost. I recorded everything, Walsh said without preamble. Every contact report Brennan made, every dismissal you gave, every warning that went unheeded. I've already provided copies to Commander Hayes and to JSOC investigators. Briggs felt something inside him break. Not anger, not surprise, just a kind of weary acceptance that the reckoning he had been avoiding for 4 years had finally arrived. Why, he asked. Because I watched you do this to Rebecca Hayes, to Catherine Stone, to Samantha Cross. I watched you sideline qualified operators because they were women, and I said nothing because it was easier to stay quiet than to challenge a senior chief. Walsh's voice hardened. This morning I listened to Alexis Brennan report an ambush 3 times. 3 times you dismissed her. I heard 12 Rangers screaming for support while you told them the situation was under control, and I almost stayed quiet again. He pulled the digital recorder from his pocket. I can't stay quiet anymore. Not after this. Not after watching men almost die because I was afraid to speak up. Briggs looked at the recorder, at the small device that contained evidence of every decision he had made to protect Nathan Brennan's daughter by preventing her from doing the job her father had died doing. I was trying to keep her safe, Briggs said quietly. I know, Walsh replied, but you almost got 12 men killed doing it. The silence stretched between them. Briggs moved to his desk and picked up the photograph. 2 men in Desert Storm, brothers in arms before one became a ghost and the other became haunted. February 24th, 1991. Briggs said, his voice distant with memory. 04:30 hours. My platoon was on a deep patrol in southern Iraq. Nathan was our overwatch. Best sniper the Army had. He saw the ambush forming, reported enemy movement, coordinated positioning, 3-sided kill zone. Briggs sat heavily on his bunk. Command dismissed it, said the Iraqis were just repositioning after airstrikes. Nathan insisted, requested permission to engage preemptively. They denied it, told him to hold fire and avoid provoking engagement. He looked up at Walsh. 30 minutes later, we walked into exactly the ambush Nathan had reported. 11 men died in the first 90 seconds. I was wounded, pinned down, watching my men get torn apart, and there was nothing I could do. His voice cracked. Nathan left his position, came down off that ridge into the kill zone. He covered my escape with suppressive fire, told me to run. That was an order, he said. He was laughing when he said it, laughing while bullets were hitting all around him. Briggs closed his eyes. I ran. I left him there, and I ran. I heard him die over the radio. The shooting stopped, and there was just silence, and I knew he was gone. You survived, Walsh said quietly. That's what he wanted. I survived, Briggs agreed, and I've been trying to deserve it ever since. When I saw Alexis's name on the roster, when I realized Nathan Brennan's daughter was going to serve under my command, I thought maybe this was my chance. I could keep her safe, make sure she didn't end up like her father, make sure no one else had to run while she died. He opened his eyes and looked at Walsh. But all I did was recreate the same situation that killed Nathan. Dismissed warnings, refused to trust the person with eyes on target. Almost got men killed because I thought I knew better. Walsh said nothing. There was nothing to say. The truth sat between them like a third presence in the room. She deserves better than this, Briggs finally said. Better than a court-martial. Better than having her career ended because I couldn't see past my own guilt. Then tell that to the investigators, Walsh said. Tell them the truth, all of it. About Nathan, about why you treated Alexis the way you did, about the pattern with the other women. Give them the full picture. It'll end my career. Yes, Walsh agreed. It will, but it's the right thing to do. And maybe that's how you finally deserve those 30 seconds Nathan bought you. After Walsh left, Briggs sat alone with the photograph and the weight of 24 years of survivor's guilt that had curdled into something that hurt the people he was trying to protect. He thought about Nathan Brennan laughing over the radio while dying in a desert halfway around the world. Thought about Alexis Brennan turning off her radio and engaging without authorization because she had seen what he refused to see. Father and daughter separated by 2 decades and connected by the same fundamental truth. When lives were at stake, courage mattered more than orders. Briggs made his decision. Tomorrow he would tell Commander Hayes everything, would lay out the full pattern of his failures, would accept whatever consequences came. It would not undo the damage, would not bring back the women he had driven away or the years he had wasted trying to atone for survival by preventing others from taking the same risks that had saved his life. But it was what Nathan would have wanted, what Nathan had earned with 30 seconds of covering fire and a laugh that said dying was acceptable if it meant someone else lived. Briggs could finally give him that. 2,000 miles away in a small apartment at Fort Benning, Georgia, Staff Sergeant Derek Kane sat at his kitchen table with a laptop and a growing sense that something was very wrong with the official story he had been told about Corango Valley. His wife had taken their daughter to bed hours ago. Kane should have been sleeping too, should have been resting while his body processed the adrenaline and trauma of surviving an ambush that should have killed him. Instead, he was making phone calls and sending encrypted messages and pulling on threads that connected to other threads in the informal network that linked special operations personnel across branches and continents. He had started with a simple question: who was on the Western Ridge? The official after-action report credited Coordinated SEAL Overwatch support for neutralizing the ambush. No individual names, no details, just vague language that praised team effort while carefully avoiding specifics. Kane had been in the military long enough to recognize bureaucratic obfuscation when he saw it. His first call had been to Sergeant Cole Mitchell, who was recovering at the same base with a facial wound that would leave a permanent scar. Mitchell had the same questions and the same frustration with non-answers. Together, they had worked their contacts. Kane knew a sergeant major who had served in Syria. That sergeant major knew a chief at DevGru. The chief knew someone at Bagram who owed him a favor. 3 days of careful inquiries had produced a name: Petty Officer Second Class Alexis Brennan. Further digging had revealed that Brennan was confined to quarters pending investigation for unauthorized engagement. that she was facing possible court-martial for insubordination and reckless endangerment. Kane had stared at that information for a full minute, his mind refusing to process the disconnect between the reality he had experienced and the official response that reality had generated. Someone had saved his entire patrol with shooting that belonged in the record books. 14 kills at extreme range. Perfect timing. Courage that came from somewhere deeper than training. And the Navy was prosecuting her for it. Mitchell's text message arrived while Kane was still processing. "This is wrong, what do we do?" Kane thought about his daughter asleep in the next room. Thought about the alternative timeline where he had died in that valley and she grew up without a father. Thought about the woman who had prevented that timeline from becoming real. He typed his response, "We fight for her the way she fought for us." The network mobilized. 10 survivors, 10 families. Unit commanders who understood that what had happened in Corango Valley was extraordinary and deserved recognition, not punishment. Letters began flooding JSOC. Phone calls to congressmen. Formal statements from Rangers who wanted it on record that Petty Officer Alexis Brennan had saved their lives when their own command structure had failed them. Kane drafted a letter to the JSOC commander that he revised 7 times before he was satisfied it conveyed both respect for the chain of command and absolute clarity about what had happened in that valley. "Sir," the letter concluded, "I have served 5 combat deployments. I have been in firefights, ambushes, and situations where survival seemed impossible. I have seen courage in many forms, but I have never witnessed anything like what happened on that western ridge. Petty Officer Brennan saw a threat that others missed. She reported it accurately and repeatedly. When her warnings were dismissed and my men began dying, she made a choice. She chose us over her career. She chose doing what was right over following orders that would have gotten us all killed. If the Navy court-martials her for that, then the Navy is punishing exactly the kind of initiative and moral courage it should be rewarding. Every man who survived that valley owes Petty Officer Brennan his life. We intend to make sure that debt is acknowledged." Kane sent the letter through official channels and copied it to every person with decision-making authority he could identify. Then he booked a flight to Bagram. Mitchell was already packing. The formal hearing took place 1 week after the ambush in a conference room at Bagram that had been hastily converted into something resembling a courtroom. Colonel Marcus Bradley presided, his 40 years of service evident in the weathered competence of his bearing and the calculated wariness in his eyes as he surveyed the assembled personnel. Commander Hayes sat to his left with 3 thick folders containing her investigation findings. 2 JAG officers flanked his right, prepared to provide legal guidance on matters that would determine whether this hearing resulted in commendation or court-martial. Senior Chief Warren Briggs stood at attention in his dress uniform, looking like a man who had aged a decade in 7 days. Alexis Brennan stood beside him, her uniform equally precise, her expression carefully neutral. The room held observers. Walsh and other members of the SEAL team, senior officers from various commands, and to everyone's surprise, 10 Army Rangers in dress uniform who had traveled from various duty stations to be present for a hearing that technically had nothing to do with them. Bradley called the hearing to order and turned first to Commander Hayes. "Commander, your investigation findings." Hayes stood and opened her first folder. For the next 20 minutes, she presented a timeline that left no ambiguity about what had happened. 3 contact reports from Brennan describing an enemy ambush in formation. 3 dismissals from Briggs classifying those reports as false positives. 2 requests for authorization to engage. 2 denials. Then the ambush. 12 Rangers in a kill zone. 2 killed in the initial contact. 10 more facing imminent death. And Alexis Brennan turning off her radio and engaging without authorization. 19 rounds, 14 confirmed kills. 4 minutes that saved 10 lives. Hayes presented the communications logs, presented Walsh's recordings, presented interviews with the 3 female operators who had previously served under Briggs. The pattern is undeniable. 4 years, 4 women, all of them qualified, all of them sidelined or dismissed. The evidence suggests, Hayes concluded, that Senior Chief Briggs's treatment of female operators stems from unresolved trauma related to the death of Colonel Nathan Brennan in 1991. Briggs survived an ambush because Colonel Brennan, Petty Officer Alexis Brennan's father, sacrificed his life to cover Briggs's escape. When Alexis Brennan was assigned to his team, Briggs attempted to protect her by keeping her in low-risk positions. This protective impulse, however well-intentioned, resulted in systematically preventing a highly skilled operator from contributing to mission success and nearly cost 12 Rangers their lives when Brennan's accurate warnings were dismissed. Bradley turned to Briggs. "Senior Chief, do you dispute any of Commander Hayes' findings?" "No, sir." "Do you have anything to add?" Briggs took a breath. What came next would end his career, but Walsh had been right. It was the only way to finally deserve the 30 seconds Nathan Brennan had bought him. "Sir, everything Commander Hayes said is accurate, but it's incomplete. I need to provide context." For the next 15 minutes, Briggs told the full story. Desert Storm, the ambush, Nathan Brennan's warnings dismissed by command, 11 men dead, Briggs wounded and pinned down. Nathan leaving his protected position to come into the kill zone covering Briggs's escape while laughing over the radio like it was all some grand adventure instead of the last minutes of his life. "I heard him die," Briggs said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was running and I heard the shooting stop and I knew he was gone. I survived because Nathan Brennan decided 30 seconds of my life was worth trading for all of his." He looked at Alexis. "When I saw your name on the roster, I saw a chance to make it right, to keep Nathan's daughter safe, to make sure you didn't end up like him. So I gave you quiet sectors, kept you away from danger, thought I was honoring your father by protecting you." His voice broke. "But all I did was recreate the same situation that killed him. I dismissed your warnings the same way Command dismissed his. I refused to trust your eyes the same way they refused to trust his. And I almost got 12 men killed because I was more concerned with keeping you safe than with doing my job." He turned back to Bradley. "Sir Petty Officer Brennan is the finest sniper I have ever served with. Better than her father, better than me, better than anyone in this room. She saw a threat I missed. She reported it accurately and repeatedly. When I failed to act on her intelligence and Americans started dying, she made a choice. She chose saving lives over her career. That's not insubordination. That's exactly the kind of initiative and moral courage we should be recognizing." Briggs came to attention. "Sir, I request that all charges against Petty Officer Brennan be dismissed and that she'd be recommended for commendation. I also request immediate relief from command and accept full responsibility for the command failures that put 12 Rangers at risk." Bradley made notes without expression. Then he turned to the Rangers. "Staff Sergeant Kane, you and your men traveled a long way to be here. Do you have something you'd like to say?" Kane stood. Mitchell stood beside him. One by one, all 10 survivors rose. "Sir," Kane said, "I'd like to testify about what happened in that valley." What followed was testimony that left no doubt about what Alexis Brennan had done and what it had meant. Each Ranger stood and told a story, described the ambush, described the certainty of death, described the mysterious rifle that had saved them when their own command wouldn't. Mitchell touched the scar on his face. "I counted 14 shots, sir. Every single one hit. I've served with snipers. I've seen good shooting. What Petty Officer Brennan did wasn't just good. It was extraordinary. And she did it knowing it would cost her everything." Private Donovan, his arms still in a sling, spoke quietly. "I was the first one hit, sir. I was bleeding out. She stopped them before they could finish us. My daughter still has a father because Petty Officer Brennan did her job when no one else would." Kane finished the testimony. "Sir, every man in this room owes Petty Officer Brennan his life. If the Navy court-martials her for saving us, it sends a message that following bad orders is more important than saving American lives. That's not the Navy I know. That's not the military I believe in." Bradley called a recess. The assembled personnel filed into the corridor to wait while he consulted with the JAG officers and reviewed the evidence. Lex found herself surrounded by Rangers who wanted to shake her hand to say thank you, to make sure she knew that what she had done mattered to them in ways that transcended military regulations and career considerations. Mitchell presented her with something wrapped in cloth. She unwrapped it to find a Ranger tab mounted in a frame, the black and gold insignia signed by all 10 survivors. The inscription beneath read, "You were never a Ranger, but when Rangers needed you most, you answered. We will never forget the 10. Lex stared at the frame, at the signatures, at the physical representation of a debt that could never be fully repaid because the currency of life-saving existed outside normal transaction. "Thank you," she managed. Thank you, Kane replied, for seeing what others wouldn't see, for having the courage to do what was right even when it cost you everything. The hearing reconvened 30 minutes later. Bradley's expression gave away nothing as the room settled into expectant silence. I've reviewed all evidence and testimony, Bradley began. The facts are not in dispute. Petty Officer Brennan disobeyed a direct order. She engaged enemy forces without authorization. She turned off her radio and conducted operations outside the chain of command. He paused, and Lex felt her future hanging in the balance of whatever words came next. She also saved 10 American lives through extraordinary skill and courage. She accurately identified a threat that was dismissed by her chain of command. She made a decision under extreme pressure that proved correct in every particular. And she demonstrated exactly the kind of initiative and moral judgment that separates adequate operators from exceptional ones. Bradley looked directly at Lex. Petty Officer Brennan, all charges against you are dismissed. Effective immediately, you are promoted to Petty Officer First Class. Your actions on January 16, 2015, saved American lives and exemplify the highest traditions of naval special warfare. I am recommending you for the Silver Star. He turned to Briggs. Senior Chief Briggs, you are relieved of command effective immediately. You will be transferred stateside pending administrative review. The Navy will determine appropriate disposition of your case. Briggs came to attention. I understand, sir. Bradley closed the file. This hearing is concluded. The room erupted in controlled chaos as Rangers moved to congratulate Lex as SEAL team members processed what had just happened, as Briggs quietly gathered his materials and prepared to face whatever came next. Lex found herself swept up in handshakes and backslaps, in the genuine gratitude of men who understood exactly how close they had come to dying and exactly who had prevented it. Through the crowd, she saw Briggs moving toward the door. On impulse, she followed him into the corridor, where he stood alone, looking diminished in a way that had nothing to do with physical size. Senior Chief, she said. He turned. Up close, she could see the years in his face, the weight he had carried, the guilt that had driven every decision he had made regarding her. Alexis, he said quietly, I'm sorry for everything. Your father saved my life, and I repaid that by almost getting men killed, trying to protect you from becoming him. Why didn't you just tell me, Lex asked, about Desert Storm, about serving with my father, about being there when he died? Because I'm a coward, Briggs said simply. Your father ran toward the guns. I ran away. I've been running ever since. Lex thought about the photograph, about two men in a desert, about choices made under fire that echoed across decades. He would have wanted us to work together, she said, not against each other. It's not too late to start. Briggs looked at her with something like wonder in his eyes, as if he had expected condemnation and received grace instead. I don't deserve that, he said. Maybe not, Lex agreed. But my father died so you could live. The least we can do is make sure his sacrifice meant something. She extended her hand. Briggs stared at it for a long moment. Then he shook it, and something in his expression suggested that a burden he had carried for 24 years might finally be easing its grip. Thank you, he whispered. Your father would be proud of you. He'd be proud of both of us, Lex replied, if we do better than we've done. She left him standing in the corridor and returned to the Rangers who were planning celebrations and talking about reunions and making sure she understood that she was part of their family, now bound by bonds that formed when one person stood between others and death. The formal ceremony happened 1 week later, small and controlled because operational security demanded discretion. No cameras, no press, just the people who needed to witness what happened when courage was finally recognized. Colonel Bradley read the citation in the flat official language that somehow made extraordinary acts sound routine. The Silver Star is presented to Petty Officer First Class Alexis Brennan for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against an armed enemy. The words washed over Lex as Bradley pinned the medal to her uniform. She thought about her father receiving his Medal of Honor posthumously, about her mother accepting it on his behalf, while a 4-year-old girl played with dolls in the next room, unaware that her father was being honored for choosing strangers over coming home. Now she stood in her father's footsteps wearing a medal that said she had made the same choice. Career over lives, orders over conscience, system over people. And she would make that choice again without hesitation. The applause when Bradley finished was genuine, carrying the weight of people who understood what the medal represented and what it had cost. After the ceremony, Lex found herself alone with the 10 Rangers who had become something more than the people she had saved. They were proof that one person's courage could echo into futures that would never exist without intervention at a critical moment. Kane presented her with a photograph. It showed Corango Valley from the western ridge, shot from exactly where she had positioned herself. A small red dot marked her location. 14 white lines radiated outward to positions where enemy fighters had died. On the back, written in careful script, "To the guardian angel we never saw, from all of us who came home, January 16, 2015. "We'll never forget," Kane said simply. "Neither will I," Lex replied. 6 months later, on a sniper range at Camp Pendleton, California, Petty Officer First Class Alexis Brennan moved among students with the easy authority of someone who had earned respect through demonstrated excellence rather than demanded it through rank. The Joint Operations Training Course mixed SEALs and Marines and Rangers in a program designed to break down inter-service rivalries and build the kind of cooperation that saved lives when bullets started flying. Among the students was a young female Marine, Lance Corporal Harper Reed, fresh from infantry training, trying to prove she belonged in a world that still questioned whether women had the physical and mental capacity for combat arms. Lex recognized the doubt in Reed's eyes, had seen it in her own mirror often enough to know what it looked like. Reed was struggling with an 800-meter target, her shots clustering left and low with frustrating consistency. Lex knelt beside her. "You're anticipating the recoil. Your shoulder tenses right before the shot breaks. The rifle knows you don't trust it." "I'm trying to control it," Reed said, frustration evident in her voice. "Don't control it. Trust it. Trust your training. The rifle will do what you tell it if you let it." Reed adjusted her position, settled her breathing, fired. The target registered center mass. "There you go," Lex said. "That's exactly right." She moved on to the next student, but she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. Reed would face the same doubts Lex had faced, would encounter the same dismissal, would fight the same battles to prove that gender was irrelevant when measured against skill and courage. But Reed would have something Lex hadn't had. Proof, visible, undeniable proof that women could excel in this world. A decorated sniper wearing instructor credentials in a silver star, demonstrating through her existence that the barriers were artificial and the limits were lies. That had to count for something. Her phone buzzed. Text from Mitchell. "Reunion next month, Fort Benning, all 10+ families. You better be there, Brennan." Lex smiled and typed her response. "Wouldn't miss it for the world." The reunion happened on a Saturday in August, when Georgia heat made the air feel solid and the humidity turned breathing into conscious work. But the weather didn't matter because the 10 Rangers and their families had gathered for something that transcended discomfort. Lex met wives and children and parents who shook her hand with grip strength that said thank you in a language beyond words. She knelt to talk with Kane's daughter, an 8-year-old with bright eyes, who asked direct questions the way children do. "Are you the lady who saved my daddy?" Lex glanced at Kane, who nodded permission. "Your daddy saved himself," Lex told the girl. "I just helped a little bit." The girl hugged her with the unself-conscious affection of someone too young to understand the full weight of what had almost happened, but old enough to know it mattered. Mitchell's wife pulled Lex aside and said simply, "Thank you for bringing him home." "What do you say to that? What words exist to acknowledge the debt of a life continued versus a life ended?" "He's a good man," Lex managed. "I'm glad I could help." As the sun set over Fort Benning, Lex stood apart from the celebration and looked at the 10 men who were laughing and eating and living because of 19 bullets fired from a ridge in Afghanistan. Kane joined her, 2 beers in hand. He offered her one and they stood together in comfortable silence. "I talked to Briggs last week," Kane said eventually. Lex looked at him surprised. "Called him to thank him for testifying on your behalf, for telling the truth even when it cost him his career." "What did he say?" "He said that the truth was the least he owed to Nathan Brennan's daughter. Said your father taught him that courage sometimes means admitting you were wrong." Kane took a drink. "He's teaching at the Naval Academy now, training new officers. Apparently he's become something of an advocate for integrating women into combat roles." "People can change," Lex said. "They can, Kane agreed. When they have a reason to. He raised his beer. To reasons to change, and to people brave enough to give them. Lex touched her bottle to his, and they drank to redemption and second chances, and the possibility that even profound failures could become teaching moments if someone was willing to learn. Later that night, back in her quarters at Camp Pendleton, Lex arranged her wall display with the care of someone creating a shrine to moments that mattered. Her father's Medal of Honor occupied the center. Colonel Nathan Brennan, who had chosen 30 seconds of someone else's life over his own future. The medal was tarnished with age, but the citation remained clear. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty. Beside it, her own silver star. Petty Officer First Class Alexis Brennan, who had made the same choice in a different valley under a different sky, but driven by the same fundamental truth. Some things matter more than following orders. The Ranger tab with 10 signatures represented the debt that could never be repaid, because the currency was lives that continued instead of lives that ended. And the photograph of Corango Valley showed the geography of a decision that had changed everything. Lex picked up her MK-13 rifle. The weapon was familiar as her own heartbeat, the weight and balance calibrated to her body through thousands of hours of practice and 19 rounds that mattered more than all the others combined. She headed to the range as the sun set over California. The facility was empty, abandoned by students who had better things to do on a Saturday evening than practice skills that might save lives someday. But Lex had learned that someday came without warning, that the moment when you needed to be ready didn't announce itself with advance notice and opportunity to prepare. You were ready or you weren't, trained or untrained, capable or inadequate. She settled into prone position at the 1,000-meter line. The target was a silhouette barely visible in the fading light. Difficult shot, good training. She thought about her father on a ridge in Iraq seeing an ambush forming and reporting it faithfully even when command dismissed his warnings. She thought about the choice he made to leave safety and enter danger because someone needed 30 more seconds. She thought about her own choice on a ridge in Afghanistan, turning off her radio and engaging without authorization because following orders meant watching Americans die. Father and daughter separated by 24 years and united by the same conviction. When lives hung in the balance, courage mattered more than career principle mattered more than politics. And doing what was right mattered more than doing what was ordered. Lex's voice was quiet in the empty range, speaking to memory and legacy and the ghost of a man who had died before she learned to understand what dying meant. I took the shot, Dad, just like you taught me. When I saw it, I took it. She settled her breathing, found the natural pause, let the world narrow to crosshairs in mathematics and the simple truth that some decisions defined everything that followed. There will always be another ridge, another valley, another moment when someone has to choose between following orders and doing what's right. The crosshairs steadied on target 1,000 meters downrange. When that moment comes, the Brennan family will be ready. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle spoke its single syllable of thunder, and the bullet flew true across the distance, carrying with it the legacy of a father who had saved one life and a daughter who had saved 10, and the promise that courage would continue as long as someone was willing to stand between strangers and death. The target registered center mass. Perfect shot, just like her father would have made. Lex worked the bolt, chambered another round, and continued training for the moment that would inevitably come when another valley needed another guardian angel, and the Brennan family would answer the call. Because that was what they did. That was who they were. And no amount of time or distance or consequence would ever change that fundamental truth. The sun set over Camp Pendleton, and the rifle continued to speak, and somewhere in a valley in Afghanistan, brass casings lay scattered among rocks, 19 small testaments, to the day when orders meant less than lives, and one woman's courage echoed across all the futures she had saved.